Hi, I'm Reggie Ramos, Director of Inclusive Public Transit at IHCD. What does it mean to design inclusively in public transit? Quite often, while we find that code provides us with programmatic and physical guidelines for accessibility, what we are called to do is to investigate frameworks and policies that underpin the way public transit has been designed over the years. Much of the work that we do lies in uncovering and understanding what works and what doesn't for everyone. And to do so, we rely on lived experience to expose not only the physical challenges of a space, but more importantly, the overarching gaps in design decision making. User experts offer unparalleled perspectives in terms of how public transit can be made better, more inclusive. When people bring with them the sum of their identities and humanity as they interact with public transit, we encounter the transformative power of movement. When we design public transit spaces, we design spaces of movement, spaces for revolution.
The world is such a stressful place for everybody, and I think sometimes it's not that hard to make things better for the overall population. It's just that there isn't enough research or testing into what's best for the consumers.
Join me as we talk about inclusive public transit. Transportation is essential. The right to travel is a fundamental right guaranteed by the 14th Amendment to the United States Constitution. The Americans with Disabilities Act recognizes and protects the civil rights of people with disabilities. It prohibits discrimination of people on the basis of their abilities. As such, the ADA has set requisite programmatic specifications to ensure that there are no barriers to the full integration of people with disabilities. These notwithstanding, the barriers for people with disabilities in public transit remain. Equitable public transit remains elusive. Access to public transit has not been equitable. This has left many communities behind, excluding them from waves of progress and prosperity. Among those perennially left behind is the disability community. Around 16% of the world's population, or an estimated 1.3 billion people, live with disabilities. According to the CDC, about 26% of adults in the United States have some type of disability. In Massachusetts, 23% of adults have a disability, with cognition and mobility disabilities being the most prevalent. The World Health Organization regards disability as an umbrella term for impairments, activity limitation, and participation restrictions. The focus has shifted from diagnosis to the functional impact of disabilities. Functional limitations become disabling at the intersection of the individual and their multiple environments. When we speak of disability, we speak of physical, brain-based, and sensory disabilities. Non-apparent conditions are common, and physical and mental conditions are along a continuum of severity. Disability is common and is part of being human. Almost everyone at some point in their lives will experience disability, whether temporary or permanent. If disability is so common, why then are we not designing spaces, public transit, with that in mind?
More public transits like here should be more aware of what kind of help we would need. Yeah, that it would be all that more staff, more announcements, a better website, more announcements, a training program like what the T has, all that.
Go around your city or town or visit the next one. Observe which communities have more transit access and transit options. Which communities are served only by 1 or 2 bus routes? Notice a pattern? Segregation of communities of color have endured, and they persist through continued underservice and inaccessibility. The lack of access to public transit in many communities have left devastating intergenerational ramifications. Not to mention that communities of color experience the highest rates of disability and are likely to be poorer. Today, when one has no access to public transit, this could literally mean no access to schools, no access to employment, and no access to opportunities. Only 1/5 of people ages 18 to 64 work full or part-time if they have travel-limiting disabilities. Lack of access to transportation prevents a person with disability from seeking work or accessing health care. Transportation is a social justice issue.
It's a big cultural problem that the American culture tends to focus on the self. So when someone asks your opinion, it's always about just this perspective. Where I think that it's better if everyone look at how our public services can benefit everyone.
Design has a transformative role in social equity. In public transit, how we design stations, trains, buses, bus shelters, how and when we employ announcements, visual and auditory cues all impact our transit experience. Whether there are elevators, escalators at stations, and whether they are working, these are key in how people with disabilities, particularly those who have mobility issues, can access public transit. Announcements, or the lack of it, can directly increase or decrease confidence in public transit.
Maybe have all, well, I know that the T is working on it, but make all stations accessible. Yeah, which is I know it's a work in progress. Probably have more wayfinding technology everywhere, not just here, but on all public transits. You know, it could be IRA, it could be GPS. It's just, wayfinding technology to make it easier to navigate. Stop announcements. That's a huge thing. Braille on the ticket vending machines, and audio.
The gap and the transition from platform to train car, from bus to the curb, the ability to smoothly board and alight trains, these all contribute to how people in general negotiate through their journey. Wayfinding, their efficiency, reliability, consistency, and availability in various accessible formats contribute to a positive transit experience.
I find it really difficult, personally. It can be a little intimidating to even just find your way around downtown Crossing Park Street. And the problem is that with all the best efforts to have transit ambassadors around, they just aren't there. They assign, one person to 2 or 3 stations, so you can go to some station, like especially Boylston Street, and there's no help. I don't believe there's even a phone there. I've tried to find one. And if you're trapped, if you're lost, if the announcements aren't working and you get off and you don't know where you are, you're basically stuck. And you can't rely on other riders to tell you where to go because it's not safe. an inspector put me on the wrong train, and I ended up going in the opposite direction of where I intended. I was not familiar with where I was going, so when I got lost, I had no idea where I was. I wasn't even sure what side of the station I was on because the announcements weren't working. So I had to, I believe I had to wander around until I found a T employee who could assist me. That was frightening. A lot of people say, oh, blind people just count the stops. But if there are no announcements at all, and the train is stopping for safety, or it's making an extra stop for whatever reason, or heaven forbid you lose count, you don't know where you are.
The presence and quality of benches enable people to successfully complete their journey. There are 10 times more people who have serious difficulty in walking than people in wheelchairs, which requires them to rest and sit in between. When we design transit spaces with the intention to serve everyone, we bridge societal gaps. Design is therefore never neutral. It can either exclude or include. It either perpetuates or reduces social inequalities. At IHCD, the goal is to inclusively design public transit, to design for everyone. To do this, we invest in contextual inquiry research with real people with lived experience in dealing with the challenges of the environment due to a physical, sensory, or brain-based functional limitation. We engage user experts to help uncover what works for them, with the idea that design that works for those at the edges works for everyone. Through this process, user experts provide insight and impart experiential expertise that can enrich design and policy processes and decisions. Through contextual inquiry, user experts interact with the environment in real life. They can then easily talk about what they are doing and why when they are doing it. This research method produces richer and more relevant information about how user experts interact with the environment or products. Our user experts have helped shape policies and design. They have helped us design the way we do public engagement, how we think about the function and design of transit stations, how we use technology and facilities on buses, trains, and stations. User experts play a central role in providing eye-opening data that are usually overlooked or are forgotten.
And also, I'd say that mobility is a real problem. A lot of stairs, a lot of buses that are difficult to get in and out of. It's often a safety hazard. I check the weather to try and prepare for being trapped somewhere when the system doesn't work properly. That goes for the ride as well as buses and train. I also check the trip planner on MBTA to try and get an estimate of where I need to be at what time. And occasionally I'll use Google Maps because I may be unfamiliar with certain stops. And I want to be sure that not only do I have an idea of where I am, sort of in relation to everything else, but also if there are any safe places to go in and keep warm or keep cool, get hydration if I need it, which is really important for my health. Because if you do get trapped somewhere, it can be really bad standing in inclement weather.
Through the years, user experts like Lisa have been instrumental in centering inclusive design and improving accessibility in public transit. User experts who take public transit offer an unparalleled level of detail and insight, crucial in policy and design. Ian is our user expert who has a fondness for public transit and cares deeply to make it better. They share with us their experiences as user experts.
Yeah, so Ian, I'm totally blind and 38 and live here in Brighton since and and I've been riding or studying and riding public transit. Way back when I was a kid, we're talking 4 or 5 years old. I had braille maps of different cities, random ones, New York, Boston, London, and Paris. I had braille maps of public transits. I used to love to read them and stuff like that. And then as time went on, I used to actually go to these cities and actually ride them when I was, a teenager with people. And now that I'm older now, I actually travel by myself, and I love to just take public transit and go out and check the cities out. Public transit's great because you don't have to wait for Ubers and taxis. It's super convenient just to go anywhere. Well, my goal is to make public transit as easy and as fun to use, and this actually contributes to work, because I work with the bank about ADA, and public transit is, every public transit should go beyond what the ADA says. They have to be, it should all be, it should all make logical sense. I make sure that things make logical sense, not just what the law is, but what's actually logical.
The accessibility of public transit, whether they are inclusively designed or not, play a significant role in shaping communities and opportunities. Through many times in our history, public transportation has been the setting for movements. Therefore, when we design public transit, a huge part of it is underpinned in the long history of the civil rights movement. It is not a coincidence that public transit is where many of our rights have been fought, and it is where, one may argue, many of our civil rights were born. Public transit is imbued with so much history, potential, and power. 1841, Frederick Douglass and his friend entered a train car reserved for white passengers in Lynn, Massachusetts. When ordered to leave, they refused. Again in 1884, activist Ida Wells filed a case protesting her removal from the ladies' car. 70 years later, in 1955, Rosa Parks ignited the modern-day civil rights movement by protesting and leading the unforgettable Montgomery bus boycott. Yet again, 40 years later, the Bus Riders Union protested, demanding for equitable service and investment that serve the marginalized. Today, when we speak of access to public transit, we speak of access to education, access to work, access to opportunities, access to making dreams a reality. Nowhere else is there a more obvious moral imperative to design inclusively and equitably than in public transit spaces. When we design public transit or design in the public transit space, we are designing places for change. We design spaces where we can all move together, where we can be in solidarity with each other.